I'm back up at the blacksmith shop today. A friend of mine gave me a whole bunch of railroad spikes that have been sitting in his garage for a very long time. I think we're going to put them to use. Currently heating up the forge, and I think for today's project I'm going to try to make a tomahawk out of a railroad spike. So the spike we're going to be using today looks like it's about, maybe 6.5 inches long. The main part of the spike is just under 3/4 of an inch thick, so 5/8 it looks like. We'll see what we can do. So I think the starting point of making a tomahawk would be to shorten this thing. So we want to heat up this end here and just start driving it in. We got to get a lot more mass here in the middle and a lot of mass for the blade, but we don't need it this long. So let's shorten this thing to about 4 inches. We don't really have a plan. All right, it looks like our railroad spike is coming up to temperature on the end. Time to start hammering it. See if we can make it shorter. Hurts. All right, I think we've shortened it enough. So we shortened it to about 5 inches. Now we have to figure out how to put a hole in here for a handle. getting the tomahawk head looking pretty good. Back in the fire, heating it up again. Alright, we have it about 99% of where we want to be. I'm going to go ahead and heat up the blade end. We're going to quench it in water. Probably not a good idea. So my water bucket is about 99% ice, but I think there's enough liquid water that we can make it work. Alright, it didn't crack or anything. Might have gotten a little warp, but I think I can sand that out. See if we can get this grinder started up. Not the easiest thing on a generator. Alright, we're slowly getting there. Got a little bit more edge polishing to do, but I'm going to change out the belt so we do a little bit quicker job. Alright, I think that's good enough for the big grinder. Now we're going to put it on the small grinder, put an edge on it, and clean it up a little bit more. Alright, we're all set for sanding. Alright, I think I have the grind on the edge pretty good. It's equal on both sides, but it's not very sharp right on the end. So I think I'm going to put it back on the grinding wheel and see if we can straighten that out. Sounds like a plan. Alright, we got to jump start this thing. Alright, I have a pretty nice edge on there, but I don't like how even it is, so we're going to hit it back on the little sander just to straighten it out just a little bit. Alright, I think that's just about good enough. So we have our railroad spike head here. I'll try to leave that a little bit native looking. We have a swedged socket, or I don't know what it's called. It's a place where the handle's going to go. It's a little bit offset, but I think when we put in the handle, nobody's going to care. The blade came out pretty good. It's polished pretty much all the way around. It has a few little blemishes, but I didn't really want to grind any deeper, so that's it. So there's my Tomahawk blade. You might ask yourself, what is a twigloo? Well, a twigloo is kind of like an igloo, but made out of wood. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Make sure we don't have any creatures living in here. Any creatures in here? I don't get in here that much. Last time I was here, there was a little field mouse running around. He's probably out shopping for food. All right, we need to fire up the little generator on the back of the mini truck. Now, since the mini truck's kind of going downhill, the generator doesn't like it because it's not level and it gets a low oil light. So we may have to put that on the ground. You can do a little bit better check for creatures in here. I don't see anything too scary. There's a little wasp nest here in the corner, but it looks like it's been there for a while. I think wintertime ran the wasps off, so that's a good thing. All right, even though it's warmer than it has been, it's still kind of cold. So we're gonna light up the little fireplace here in the corner and see if we can heat it up in here. We'll see if this burns. Get a little bit of wood shavings in here. That should help. Oh yeah, now we'll get fire. We'll give that a little time to take the chill out of the air. All right, we got the little fireplace burning good. Let that keep heating up. We need to go ahead and sharpen all of our turning tools, organize this desk because we haven't really been here in a while, and make sure the lathe still works. It would be nice if things worked. We got all those things sharpened up. So all we're trying to do on these is put a nice cutting edge here on the front. And my brother-in-law taught me, the thing you try to do is match the angle on the grinding wheel and keep increasing the angle just a little bit until you get sparks clipping back along the top. As soon as you know that, you should have a super nice cutting edge. Take a look at the lathe and come up with a plan. The heater's heating up nice in here. I can almost stand in this corner and feel the heat. All right, the game plan today is to make a handle to fit this Tomahawk head. I'm going to use this maple. It has a really good grain on it. I know it's probably not the best wood to use. I should use a hickory or an oak or something like that. This is the wood I have laying around, so that's what we're going to use for right now. I think the first thing we need to do is go ahead and get this piece of wood chucked up in the chuck and get it stretched between centers here and just round the thing off a little bit, and then we'll start trying to lay out what needs to happen. So there's not a lot to this. Obviously, man, I haven't been here so long. Everything is all discombobulated. So what we're going to do is kind of guess at the center here, because we don't have to be that accurate. And we need something to bang on it with. Good enough. We'll bring this tailstock holder in and try to guess at the center there also. Again, not super important. We're just looking for something that kind of spins nicely. All right. Now we're going to test this at slow speed real quick, just to make sure it doesn't wobble too bad. That looks good. So right now we're holding the wood with this little chuck at the end, which isn't very secure. And it has pressure on it with this little thing over here that lets it turn nice and smooth. But what we want to do is turn this little first piece into a circle so that we can clamp it into this better chuck. And I'll show you that as we go along. Everything's a process. It takes time. Also going to pick up the speed just a little bit. So we're starting to take those corners off nicely. Now, in order for this thing to fit in the other end, it's got to be a certain size. And I have a set of calipers set up that just so matches that size. So we got to get pretty much as soon as this thing is round, all the way around, it'll fit. All right, so the chuck on this side is tapered on the inside. And what that means is over here, I cut this on a little bit of a taper so it's bigger right on the end than it is, well, about 1/2 inch in. So we're going to flip this piece around, put it back in the lathe, and it should be a lot easier to work with. And we'll open this chuck up just enough to get this piece of wood in there. And then we'll re-spike it on this end. That'll give us a nice center point. But it doesn't have to be that tight this time. And then we'll tighten this thing down. All right. So this will give us a much more solid connection to the lathe. You can see the wood goes inside this chuck, and these jaws crimp down. There's 3 different jaws, and they're clamping down on the wood. That isn't going to go anywhere. Next thing we need to do is take a couple measurements. We know this is our Tomahawk head, and we want the shaft to be at least as wide as the outside of this whole circle. So that looks like it is 1.5 inches. So we want a 1.5 inch diameter. So pretty much if we just round this stock off all the way, that should be close. So we'll start there. And we'll start with the same tool that we just had a minute ago, just to knock all the high edges off, and then we'll speed it up and make it go quick. All right, so you can see we're just knocking the edges off, some more than the others, but slowly and surely this thing will get round, and then we'll move this fence down and cut off this other little piece, do the same thing. There are some other chisels we could use that would probably make this process faster, but until we get more rounded, I don't want to risk getting a chisel stuck and gouging out this wood. It's always a good idea to rotate the piece one time, make sure it doesn't hit the guard. Alright, we're going to put this chisel away. See how it has a nice sharp triangle point? We're going to go away with that. And we're going to go with this chisel instead. It's just a flat, slightly curved blade. Now I'm going to move the camera to give you guys a different view. All right, we're going to let this camera run for a little bit. Looking pretty good. We still have quite a bit of a flat area here, but I'm going to go ahead and move down to this end and we'll get everything mostly round, and then we'll speed this thing up again. Another thing is you don't want your tool rest to be too far away from the work, because what happens is your knife gets in here and it can get pulled down. So it's better to have the minimum gap you can get between your tool and the wood, and always keep your fingers behind the rest. And never ever get your thumb forward of where your fingers are. Just some safety tips. While you're cutting, you can tell if it's round by resting your tool on the top. And if it hops up and down, you know it's not round. Like if we did it over here, it'll hop a little bit. I'll show you. So right here, it's not really hopping, but on this flat spot, you can see it hops a little bit. So you can just run your tool on the top, and it'll tell you how you're doing. We're going to carve down this flat spot a little bit more. Then we got to move our tool rest in, and then we'll probably change to a different type. All right, we'll move down to this end. Get it all about the same. Come on, tool. Take this opportunity to get the tool rest a little bit closer to the work. Bring it up a little bit. Make sure it clears. All right, that has everything pretty much rounded up. I have a little bit more flat here, but we want to make sure we're not getting too narrow. So we know we want 1.5 inches, so we're good. We have a lot more material we can take off. Let's speed it up a little bit. Also, you can tell by the size of the wood chips coming off if your tool is sharp or not. These were pretty good, but now we're getting down to this fine sawdust. So we're going to go back over and sharpen our tool. Stay with this. All right, now we got to start figuring out exactly what we're going to do for the end diameter. Looks like we know the width is set to our calipers, but on the length, it could actually go a little bit further, maybe. Or we might have to do some grinding in here. I'm not exactly sure, but we're just about to the right diameter. I think we're going to go just a touch more, and then we're going to have to trim down the end piece to fit inside this circle. That should be fun. Let's keep going. All right, we are just about there. Again, I think I want the shaft on this thing to fit to the outside of this circle, which is just about where the calipers are. We're still a little bit wide, but if you look at different directions around this circle are slightly bigger than others. So we're going to say that that's good enough. So now what we need, I'm going to turn you guys this way just a little bit. What we need to do is neck down the end of this thing, probably closer to, well, let's get it the maximum we can. So the biggest part of the circle, because it's not even either. So we want to get that thing down to, let's say 1 inch. So we're going to take about 1 inch at the end and bring it down further. think we're going to stop right there. We don't want it to be a loose fit. If anything, we'll have to sand it later to make that fit on there. But I think that's getting pretty close to what we're going to need. And I left a little bit extra so we can adjust it in and out as we need to. We might sharpen the end just a little bit to help it slide on. There we go. That should help it slide on the shaft good. Now what we got to figure out is what the handle is going to look like. We actually need two things. Is how long is the handle going to be? We know we want it at this full diameter up here at the top, but that's a pretty big handle. So we're going to bring this down in diameter a little bit. Not much, just a little bit. Like for, I don't know, let's say from here to there. We're going to bring this thing down in diameter just slightly. And then how long do we want this thing to be? I don't know. How long is a typical hatchet hammer handle, or how long is a tomahawk supposed to be? We don't know. We're just making it up as we go here. So we're going to go ahead and err on the side of longer is better. All right, so let's go ahead and neck this down a little bit. And then we're going to bring it back to close to what it is now here at the bottom. So it's going to kind of have a little hourglass shape to it. We don't know. We're hoping. I'm going to go ahead and sharpen up the tool again. Anytime it's not cutting the way you want, you got to sharpen. All right. So that's pretty much going to be our handle. The axe head itself is going to fit right over that part there, and we'll have to figure out how to tighten it up on there. We'll probably have to cut a slot and put a wedge in. It necks down just a little bit and then starts spreading back out, and that'll help when you're swinging the thing for it not to slide out of your hand. I think that's going to be the end of the handle, so I went ahead and cut in a little bit, but I'm not going to cut it off yet until we sand all of this down, put some oil on it, and hope for the best. Kind of want it to look nice. All right, next step, we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of sanding on it. And in order to do that, it's safer to get rid of this tool rest so you don't wrap your hand up in the thing. And looking for some old sandpaper, that looks pretty good. And for sanding, we turn the speed way up. Oh yeah, that's feeling pretty good. Now, I'm not going to worry about making it perfect right now because we're going to end up turning this thing into like an egg shape. But I'm going to do that with a sander, not on the lathe. So let's go ahead and separate the end of this thing. And that'll be the end of the lathe experience, I think. Right before this thing breaks off, I want to go ahead and sand the end as the best we can. Got to be careful here so it doesn't snap off. Good enough. Loosen up this end and that end should just break off. Just like that. Just like that. We'll just use that to sand right on the end here. All right. Next thing to do is look at our fit and finish here. Obviously, it's still a tight fit, which is good. We'll start slowly sanding this thing down and get that thing on there. Now I think the handle looks a little heavy, but we'll worry about that later. All right, so that should do it up here at the wood turning shop. Let's go back to the garage and finish this thing up. All right, we're back in the garage. We're gonna work on this thing and get it finished up. All right, as far as next steps go, we need to shape this handle more like an egg. Nobody wants a round handle, so we got to do that. But I think the first thing we need to do is go ahead and permanently mount the hatchet head or the tomahawk head to the handle so that we make sure that the blade is going to be in line with the egg shape that we build here. The reason I'm worried about it is this isn't exactly round, and we're going to have to slowly sand this thing to fit into that hole. Yeah, let's get that going. So I think the easiest way to knock this out would be right here on the belt grinder. Now, yeah, it's wider on the bottom than it is on the top. So we're gonna have to make this thing fit the bottom all the way down, and then, I don't know, figure something out. Getting closer. All right, I think that's as far as I want to go right this second. I'm going to try to drive the hammer handle down into it just to get the tightest fit we can possibly get. Now I also see we are going to have to sand a little bit here in the front because the blade kind of goes up on an angle, and maybe a little bit here in the back. So I think we need to mark where we think the handle is going to be and get that sanding done before we drive it on. All right, so we got our trusty Sharpie here. And we're going to mark it on the end. Just that's going to mean blade. And this will mean hammer side. So the wider thing to the back, the sharper thing to the front. And now we got to figure out what we're going to do here. I think we're going to give it a little sanding. Oh, I don't know. Down to maybe here. Something like that underneath. And in the back, we're going to do the same thing, just a little bit less in the back. We'll see if that works. And once we get this thing hammered on there, I really don't want to have to take it off again. So I also think we're going to cut the slot in the top here in a minute. Let's go ahead and get this sanding done first though. That's got our notches cut down. Now I want to go ahead and clean this edge up a little bit. Probably don't need it because as we hammer this thing on, it's gonna sit down in there pretty good. And if we mess it up, we can always recess it a little bit more. So let's go drive this thing on there. All right, so there's a couple ways we could do this. We could either just lock it in like that and hammer on the end. That came out pretty good. So I don't think we're going to mess much with it. We're just going to clean up where we sanded around the edge. We're going to hand sand it a little bit. We'll cut the notch in the top and call that good. All right, that's good enough. Let's go ahead and cut the slot in the top, and that'll be for a wedge to tighten the whole thing up. I think the best way to cut this wedge is right here on the bandsaw. We're gonna try to line it up front and back.
All right, that should pretty much do it. We have the wedge cut or a slot cut in the middle. I don't want to make too much wood out of there because it will weaken the structure. All right, so we have our slot cut, and I found some black walnut. I use this on the archery stuff quite a bit, but I just went ahead and put it on the sander real quick, made it into a wedge. And what we're going to end up doing is driving that wedge in like that once we get the axe handle on the way we want it. So we're going to go ahead and put this back in the vise, tap on the axe head, tap this on one more time, make sure it looks good, and then we'll drive the wedge in. Let's inspect. So yeah, a little bit of a sanding. Our angle wasn't quite perfect, but it's pretty good. The back could have been a little bit less also. We could trim this face down a little bit more to make that fit nicer. Or we could just say that's good enough. I think that's going to be good enough. Next step, we need to drive this wedge in. And I guess we're just going to drive it in all the way from the top. But I am going to put some glue on this wedge just so it doesn't come back out on its own. On each face here. It doesn't need a lot, obviously. As soon as it gets in there, it's going to be pretty permanent. All right. Line that thing up and drive it home. All right, so that's got our wedge in there. We're going to go ahead and cut this off with the bandsaw. All right, we have the end of it sanded pretty smooth, but it looks pretty good. There is a slight gap here on the back corner, but I don't think that's going to matter much. We did get quite a bit of separation with that wedge, and the head seems really tight on there. Next thing, we need to change the shape of this handle. We need to make it look more like an egg. I think the right way to do this is just freehand it on the grinder or the sander. So we're going to fire this thing up, try to hold the blade level. That's working okay, but I'm not liking the control I have. So we're gonna try this something a little different. All right, so we have this thing chucked up in the vise. What I'm gonna use is this lapping wheel on an angle grinder and hope for the best. All right, the handle's looking really good. It has a nice flat side on it. It's easy to hold on to. I don't know if you can see there. Feels super smooth. But I think I want to go ahead and burn it just a little bit and then sand it again. Now, I don't want a lot. I just want a little bit of charring to take off any of the little fur that's in there. Highlight the grain just a little bit. Sure I'm not getting the blade hot. And I want a little bit more charring right down here where you hold on to it. It'll make it look like it's been held on to a lot. So we'll do that a little bit heavier right there. I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead and hit it with the sandpaper one more time just to clean it up. And that's going to do it. I think the last step we need to do, we're going to grab a little bit of boiled linseed oil and coat the handle with it. All right. So all we do is put this boiled linseed oil on a paper towel. Try to protect the end grain. And let it soak into the handle material. Don't want our axe to fall out. And there's nothing wrong with putting this boiled linseed oil on the metal parts either. It will help protect them, and I didn't coat them with any type of wax or anything when we came out of the forge. Usually when I come off the forge, we coat all of our metal with wax to help keep any rust from showing up. But we didn't do it this time, so boiled linseed oil will do just fine. And that's it. That is one complete tomahawk from a railroad spike. So that's going to do it. We have our completed railroad spike tomahawk. The handle's a little thicker than probably it should have been. I wanted to trim the outside edges down even with the metal, and I may come back and do that later on the sander. But right now I didn't want to worry too much about it. But yeah. Came out really nice. The handle is very comfy to hold. Next thing to do, we gotta throw this thing at the axe wall and see how it sticks. So you guys get outside, do something fun, and come back and tell me about it.